Coming up on the Civil Discourse, part one of a roundtable discussion with two police commissioners. Commissioners Danielle Outlaw and Charles H. Ramsey discuss their experiences in Philadelphia and other major U.S. cities. They address national concerns about gun violence, community policing practices, and the call for police reform.
I think everyone recognizes something has to be done. We're tired of marching, we're tired of demonstrating, we're tired of the meetings just for the sake of meeting, right? So we're definitely at a very pivotal point here. It's a turning point, a tipping point, I should say.
Hello and welcome to the Civil Discourse. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, Dean of the Pennoni Honors College at Drexel University, speaking to you from my office at Bentley Hall in Philadelphia. Today is part one of a roundtable discussion with two police commissioners. My guests are individuals with extensive experience in the area of law enforcement. Charles Ramsey is a former police chief of Washington, D.C., and a retired police commissioner of Philadelphia. Danielle Outlaw is a former police commissioner of Portland, Oregon, and the current police commissioner of Philadelphia. Welcome, Commissioners Ramsey and Outlaw, to the Civil Discourse.
Thank you.
So you both have a great deal of experience with three different cities. Commissioner Ramsey, you began your policing career in Chicago, went on to DC, and then Philadelphia. And Commissioner Outlaw, you began in Oakland, California, then Portland, Oregon, and now Philadelphia. I wonder if each of you, perhaps starting with Commissioner Ramsey, could say something about policing in the cities that you worked in before you came to Philadelphia that served as the groundwork or the foundation for your culmination of work in Philadelphia as police officers and commissioners.
Sure. Well, let me start. First of all, I think it's not just the city, it's the era in which you were policing that makes a difference. I started my policing career in 1968 as a police cadet in the Chicago Police Department, which happens to be my hometown. And I served 30 years in that department. Policing was quite different when I began my career versus where we are now. For an example, the big social experiment, if you will, in the Chicago Police Department was just teaming a black and a white officer together. They called them salt and pepper cars because, you know, to integrate a police car was a big deal back in those days. It started in the mid 60s. There were no women that were assigned to field duty at all. Women were either assigned as matrons in the women's detention, or they were youth officers at the time. And that was it. So there's been a lot of change. Now, one of the other huge differences is the size of the department, size of the city. Obviously, Chicago is a much larger city. The police department is much larger than either DC or Philadelphia, about double the size of Philly. And so obviously, you know, resource-wise, you have more to work with, I think, because you have, you know, larger number of people. And Philly reminds me a bit of Chicago on a much smaller scale. When I came to Philly, I was very comfortable because I had spent so much time in Chicago. So I was used to a large department. I was used to the complexity, used to crime, used to all those kinds of issues. DC, on the other hand, is very different. And I cannot compare DC to any other city. And it's because of the heavy federal presence. I mean, you have obviously the White House, the Capitol. You've got Embassy Row, where all the, you know, different countries have their embassies located, State Department, and so forth. And because you spend a considerable amount of time, because that's the largest department in the district, a lot of what you do, not all, but a significant percentage, deals with that reality. I mean, every time the president decides to go anywhere, we provide an escort along with the Secret Service and Park Police to get him from point A to point B. You don't have that in other cities. And certainly post 9/11, the intensity of Homeland Security was really ramped up not just for the president, vice president, but visiting heads of state. So the responsibilities in DC are similar, but also quite different.
Okay, well, that's a really great, very rich overview with lots of pieces that I hope we can delve into further. I wonder, I mean, Commissioner Outlaw, your career is shorter than Commissioner Ramsey, but you've seen change too. Can you give us a brief overview of the sort that he did?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would look at it from a cultural perspective. Obviously, I mean, we can talk about policing eras, but a lot of what shapes who I am and just my leadership style is not only culture, but I focus a lot on relationships. And when I think about my hometown, Oakland, California, I think about, it's just a really down to earth, grounded culture, right? What you see is what you get. Some people joke and say, we're really, really friendly until we're not, right? But it's just very direct. But at the same time, you know what you're dealing with, right? Then I moved from the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, to the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of folks, even myself, I thought, oh, Portland is easy peasy, right? Because Oakland is right next to it, it borders Berkeley. And so we know that a lot of people moved from Berkeley, California and retired and went to Portland, Oregon. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm ready for this type of culture. I can do this all day, every day. Everyone love, peace, all this, right? And I get to the Pacific Northwest and I very quickly learned that culturally there, it's a very passive aggressive culture. You can spend 2 hours in a meeting. There's lots of meetings, but you can spend 2 hours in a meeting and everyone will tell you to your face. And this is kind of generalizing, but not really. It's the Portland nice or the Pacific Northwest nice. Folks will tell you, oh, this was a great meeting, very productive, glad we did this. And then literally people will walk out the room and say, I don't know why we just did this. That was a terrible idea, right? So it's again, a very passive aggressive culture. So you can imagine when you transfer that, you can imagine how long it takes to get things done, how long to get things implemented or enacted, because everyone wants to have a meeting to talk about it and talk about it some more. But I say all of that to say, I quickly learned that relationship-wise, I had to maneuver in a different way. I had to move differently because culturally, that was how you get things done. If you sit down and you're right in somebody's face and you make it very clear, I want A, B, and C, it's not necessarily going to work that way because people will think that you're being rude or you're being insensitive to all of the other perspectives and, not open. So it really taught me, and I'm a pretty patient person, but I think it really taught me a lot more patience than I had when I got there. And it really forced me to engage with those who didn't necessarily have something nice to say, whether it was personally about me and my role or about the police.
But tell us about how you adjusted to Philadelphia and how you see the Philadelphia landscape for policing.
Had there not been this thing called the pandemic, I would be further along than I would have been, when I compare it to when I was onboarded in Portland, right? And because when I got here within 30 days or shortly after a month, the pandemic hit, my whole list of things, in my off time, the restaurants, all these things that I wanted to go, the touristy things that were on my list, either they were shut down, the restaurants were closed because of the pandemic, or because I was working so much, a lot of the places that I wanted to visit, I now saw them in a different light. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, given that things are slowly reopening and are beginning to settle. And I can just kind of get out as Danielle, hopefully, and not Commissioner Outlaw, hitting up a lot of these places at work, as opposed to me being able to do it in my personal time and space. So it's still kind of happening, quite frankly.
Okay. And you, Commissioner Ramsey, coming here from
DC.
You in DC. So how do you see and remember Philadelphia? Is it with fondness?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I left Chicago and born and raised in Chicago, I spent the first 48 years of my life there, 30 years in the department. I didn't realize that when you go to a different city and you join a different police department, that's when it really dawned on me that there truly are different cultures in policing. I thought everybody did things pretty much the same way as they did in Chicago until I got to DC and I found out, no, they don't do the things the same way. That doesn't make it bad. It's just different. And DC, it wasn't that hard an adjustment because DC has so many people that, quite frankly, I mean, everybody's from somewhere else just about in DC. You know, when I came to Philly, because I had gone through that once before, I kind of knew what to expect, but still, you're an outsider. I think the difference with me is that, I mean, I live in Philly. That's a choice. I came here for a job, but I chose to stay after I retired. I like Philadelphia, but I'm a native Chicagoan and I'll always be a native Chicagoan. I'm not trying to be anything other than that.
But it's interesting that you have chosen to stay in Philly, which I take as a great compliment to the city.
It is. It's because it's where I want to be, not because of where I was born, but I still have my Chicago roots. I tell people in a heartbeat, I'm still a Chicago Bear fan. The Eagles are my second favorite team. And I'm afraid to say that. It is a city of neighborhoods. People with a lot of pride care about their city, care about their sports teams, much like they do in Chicago.
Yeah, no, you make so many good points here. But one point that you made early on, which I would like you both to pursue, is this notion of different police cultures in different cities, which makes complete sense. If there are different cultures in different cities, and different mindset, different styles, you will have different police cultures. And yet I don't think this is something particularly recognized, and certainly I never heard it said very much during this tumultuous year that we've gone through. And I wonder if you could elucidate what you mean by different cultures. Are there value judgments that you would make about better and worse policing, or is it more style that is relatively just different? Commissioner Outlaw, could you address that?
To answer your question right off the bat, it's a little bit of both, right? It's
Yeah.
not just style, it's not just culture, right? Police departments are a smaller subset of the culture that it's in.
Right.
Period, right? And generally, for the most part, and even more so for us now, when we recruit, ideally you're recruiting from your own communities because you want your department to be reflective of the community that you're in. And so for a place like Philadelphia, it is a city of neighborhoods. But we also know that within these neighborhoods, when we're talking about social justice, we're still dealing with some issues of bias and discrimination and racism. And we know that we're recruiting from the human race. We have recruitment tools put in place to ensure that we're identifying and we're properly screening individuals that reflect the values of our department and our organization. But every now and again, somebody's going to squeeze through, right? That might not reflect the values, or they interview really well, they test really well. And that's why it's important for us to have systems of accountability in place so that we can catch that, while it's smoke before it turns into fire. With all of that said, style is very important because how we relate, again, going back to my previous point, how you get something done in Portland might be a little bit different than how you get something done in Oakland. Heck, if we all went abroad and did business in China, right, or in any Asian culture, how we got business done, how we seal a deal is completely different than, how we would consider success here in the United States. So you have to consider culture and how that impacts or influences your style here. Now, it just so happens, like I said, I keep mentioning it because it's very relevant. I'm a very relational person, which means I like to go out and about. I like to meet people. In my first 7 months in Portland, I was hoarse because I was speaking all the time, but I was actually out and engaging and connecting. There was no virtual this or virtual that. And so and there's an expectation because traditionally that's what we do as new leadership in a police department, whether you call us chiefs, commissioners, superintendents, whatever our titles are. We're meeting with community leaders, we're meeting with people internally, we're interviewing folks, we're doing all these things. It's very one-on-one, very social, very relational. And for me to get here, and then a month later, the pandemic to hit, and then now we don't have all of those warm touch points, literally, the ability to get out and connect and engage people as an outsider, right? All people are doing, and I think we're living in an era of information overload. There's so much information out there. even though there's some really good information out there. People pick and choose what they want to read or what they want to believe, and their perceptions are shaped based on that, right? So I'm an outsider coming in, and they already have their opinions formulated on me based off of what they think or who they think that I am. So given that I'm meeting a lot of people for the first time virtually, it's a lot tougher to read people, because traditionally that's how we go out and about and we meet.
I can
people as
imagine how
leaders.
challenging that must have been for
Yeah,
you to come in here with a pandemic and as a relational person, as you put it, without those touch points that you were used to.
Yeah, and I think there was an assumption too, that here in Philadelphia, because we're a city the size that we are, that we had the technology to even do things like virtual meetings, webcams, smartphones, cameras. A lot of us didn't even have this, laptops, and a lot of us still don't. So, just I think little nuanced things like that that we need to think about, especially moving forward. And I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit down the road, but how we do policing now is changing. We have to adapt and evolve.
Yes. So before we get into that, I don't know if Commissioner Ramsey wants to add to this question of style.
Well, first of all, Danielle, I mean, I think really hit the nail on the head in many areas as it relates to that. And I mean, and it's more than just changes in terminology and workflow and all those things, which are part of it, but which is different, obviously. But there are other types of, and I'll give you an example of differences. Chicago is a police department, or at least it was when I was part of it, that was very much on the proactive side in terms of policing. Okay, you had officers that really hit the street, and I mean, made a lot of arrests, things of that nature. When I went to DC, DC was very laid back. In fact, one of the challenges I had was actually, motivating people. And it's not to say they didn't have good policemen there. They did have good policemen there, but there weren't very many expectations in terms of being proactive and really addressing crime by focusing on crime, by analyzing crime, by knowing where it's taking place and having a strategy and a plan to deal with it, And so that was a challenge, but historically, the DC Police Department just hadn't operated that way. And so, that was something that we had to put in place. Now, politics, Chicago back in my day had one rule, and that was if you wanted to survive politically, just don't do anything to upset Mayor Daley.
I was just going to say, you were Mayor Daley.
Because
in 1968.
The first Mayor Daley, I mean, incredibly powerful man.
Father,
old school,
right?
Truly old school, right? His son, who was a very good mayor, by the way, I really did like Richard M. Daley. But again, Chicago has just got strong leadership at the top, right? And so you have aldermen that are there that are kind of nipping at your heels here and there. But the bottom line is, as long as you don't cross City Hall, okay, and there's only one floor in City Hall that matters, you're pretty much going to be okay. That was politics, Chicago style. When you come to DC, people that live in DC are very, very sophisticated politically, and that's because it is such a political town. When you ask a person where they live, they'll quickly tell you what ward they live in. And again, Philly reminds me a bit more of Chicago, and the strength of unions is another thing that drives culture.
Right.
And,
I want to get into
varies.
that, but I want to now move into the issue of what we're facing now, what you have faced, what you have dealt with over the past year, because both of you are talking about styles of police departments and cultures and so forth. And I wonder if you think that all of this is radically changed now in the wake of what we saw with the combination of the pandemic and the social justice movement, and particularly the Black Lives Matter movement, as it connects to policing. And I want to know what you think about some of the more radical views that have been aired, defund the police, which I know people interpret in different ways, but has really been across the country promoted. Do you think it means different things in different cultures, given you just mentioned police cultures? Or do you think it's just a sea change that you as commissioners and Danielle, particularly in Philly here, are really going to have to grapple with in a new way.
Things have not changed, meaning past tense, but things are changing. We've been sitting on a powder keg for quite some time. And what we saw over the last year was that powder keg, right? It's gotten the attention of everyone. I think everyone recognizes something has to be done. We're tired of marching. We're tired of demonstrating. We're tired of the meetings just for the sake of meeting, to the point where the federal government, the administration, is paying attention and saying, what are some things that we can do, that we can put in place, right? To show through legislation that we're paying attention, right? So we're definitely at a very pivotal point here. It's a turning point, a tipping point, I should say. With that said, I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I think that's what the call to defund or even abolish, when we're talking about abolishment, that's what that does. The bottom line is, until we come up with, whenever that is later down the road, whatever the alternative, the 100% alternative to law enforcement or police will be, we're going to have to phase ourselves into that approach, whatever that is. But right now, today, right now, for the next 10, 15, 20 years, we need police. We need our law enforcement. And in order for us to maximize our ability, in order for us to give you the best service that we can possibly give you, in order for us to meet the needs and the requirements and the expectations of the ever-changing community, in order for us to adapt with technology and policy and go back and evaluate what we're doing, what we did wrong, in order for us to have personnel and keep all these things require investment, not divestment. So the real easy answer, I think, and I think it's a cowardly one, quite frankly, to say, oh, well, the police take up the most money, but crime is still going up. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. You have to give us the training, the tools, the resources, the equipment that we need in order to be effective. If you continuously pull away from, and then at the same time demand more, how does someone not say, okay, you're talking out of both sides of your neck here?
You know, the whole idea of systemic racism. Do you feel that the police force is systemically problematic? Because earlier you said something about, well, there are some few bad ones that squeeze their way in, which is very different from the general view of some protesters that the whole institution is riddled with problem that needs to be completely rethought. So I wonder what you think of that, and then we'll move to Commissioner Ramsey.
And I think there needs to be clarity around that, right? We are part of a larger system. Mm-hmm. We are part of a larger criminal justice system. We are the entryway, we're the front doors, right? The gates into the criminal justice system, but we're but one part. And so I think by, generalizing and painting this broad stroke and saying, well, because you're part of this larger system, all of law enforcement is broken it's a mistake. It's definitely a mistake, because we're needed. We know we're needed. Look at what's happening with the crime rate, the violent crime, the non-fatal shootings and the homicides growing up. And the first thing people say is, where are the police? What are you doing? Well, which is it? Do you want more police?
But do you think the police are being recruited properly? Do you think the right people are in the force, as well as are they trained properly?
But that goes back to me, the point that I made earlier. It's a difference between adjusting and making tweaks within the system of law enforcement, as opposed to saying the entire system of law enforcement is bad. The entire system for us, right? I'm not talking about the criminal justice system. I'm talking about the courts, the prosecutors. I'm not talking about them. For us in police, there are things, and when we talk about reform and accountability, those are the things that us as law enforcement leaders, we're responsible for that. Are we recruiting? Are we reflecting the values that we say? Are we really acting out who we say we are? Are we still showing videos and commercials and recruiting tools, showing people rappelling down the side of buildings, hopping out of helicopters, and, or is that really who we are? Or are we showing the community, the people that we want to recruit, that, we got single moms here. We got people with second and third careers here, people with lived experience. You might have been a social worker. You might have, those are things that we can little things that we can tweak, right? And implement oversight. And again, accountability, those are fixable. That's what I'm responsible for. But to throw the entire profession of law enforcement out or police out and say, well, we don't want any of you because of these things here and there need to be tweaked is a terrible thing to do, terrible thing to do.
Okay, do you want to add to that, Commissioner?
Well, I
Ramsey?
tell you, that's pretty powerful. There's not a whole lot to add other than just to say that, you know, when I talk to people about this whole defund issue, which I am not obviously a proponent of, I hear different things, but what I hear more often is that, you know, there ought to be more mental health workers, homeless outreach. I don't disagree with that. I haven't talked to any police chiefs that disagree with that. But we have to remember the reason police have a lot of these responsibilities is because cities have underfunded these agencies for years. And it's going to take time to staff them up to a level where they can actually respond to the calls with someone going through a mental health crisis, deal with the volume of people in need of housing, substance abuse counselors and so forth. It's not going to happen overnight. So you need long-term and short-term strategies.
Well, thank you so much. We're actually out of time. This has been such an inspiring conversation, and I want to thank you greatly for joining me. And I want to thank my audience today for being with us for part one of this roundtable discussion on the civil discourse. Please be sure to tune in for the second part of this roundtable discussion.